Welcome to today's webinar, courtesy of the Kentucky Small Business Development Center in Louisville. Discover no-cost, valuable business services to help you thrive, whether starting your entrepreneurial journey or scaling your existing business. We have the resources and expertise to help you succeed. For more information, please visit our website or text 502-977-5800. Thank you for joining us today. Feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions or engage with our speaker. Let's get started.
Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome to another edition of Toolkit Tuesday. Happy Tuesday. Glad you guys can join us today. It is a snowy day here in Louisville, Kentucky, and as always, I'm joined with my good friend and coworker, Janet Flaw. Hey, Janet, how are you?
I'm good, Dave. I'm all cuddled up at home and keeping warm. So it's nice.
And I am high above the city of Louisville in our SBDC studio, high atop the PNC Tower, the 23rd floor, if anybody's interested. But so thanks for joining us today. We got a really great guest today, but just to make sure that you can see and hear me, if you wouldn't mind, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a toolbar. And if not, just hover over that with your cursor and it should pop up in there. You'll see the little chat button. If you wouldn't mind, just clicking the chat button and then telling me hello and where you're joining from and your name. This is the fun part of this whole thing where we get to see where everybody's coming in from. So there's Jenny in Sellersburg. I am in Louisville, Kentucky here on a good snowy day. So hopefully there's somebody else out there. I can see a bunch of you guys popping in, getting in settled there. The numbers are popping up. There's Gil in Frankfurt. Good to see you. Hi, Meg. Meg's here in Louisville with us. Okay, there's a bunch of you guys out there. I can see the numbers clicking up. Don't be shy. Just say hello and where you're from. It's good to know. I don't know if you guys can hear us. All right. Well, I guess everybody's going to be shy today. But anyway, you know, being an entrepreneur is tough. And, but there are a lot of resources out there in the world. And, here at the Small Business Development Center, our sole purpose is to help you thrive and to grow and help you grow and fund your business and provide resources for you. So reach out to us. But, the other part of entrepreneurship is that we see a lot of, these memes that show that an entrepreneur is all in, sleeping in the office and, just absolutely forgetting about the other facets of their lives just to focus in on this business. That's not really a healthy way to do things. And we're all busy, but there are ways to manage this where you can, actually take care of yourself and thrive in all areas of your life if you do this in a mindful way. So today I have invited my good friend Amanda Villaveses to come and speak a little bit about this whole idea of managing, your busy life and taking care of yourself. Hello, Amanda.
Hello, how's it going today?
Good. I'll let you introduce yourself, but you are a great resource for the community. You do a lot of workshops. You really help a lot of people. And, I've been, I guess over the last year or so, I've been kind of on this whole quest about, managing your personal life and make sure that, there's boundaries and, taking care of yourself, so this, I was really happy when you agreed to come on board here and kind of chat a little bit about this. So,
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. This is a
okay.
good topic to end their year with.
Absolutely. Because, you get some tools together. This is the time to really, I think everybody has a mindset of, now's the time to make some changes and, thinking about things in December to get set up and get a good start in January is a good place to be.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn the steering wheel over to you and let you drive here. And let's just get started.
All right, let me get my screen shared with you all.
As we go through the day today, if you have any questions or comments, just pop them in the chat. And this is a good opportunity to, have a real conversation with somebody that can help. So take advantage of that. Hello, Estella. Good to see you.
All right, all good on the screen?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, great. All right. So today we're going to be talking about balanced living in a fast-paced world. And what does that even mean? What does balance mean? What is, can we really achieve balance? But before we begin, I'll just tell you who I am. I'm Amanda Villaveses. I'm a marriage and family therapist in private practice here in Louisville, and I'm also the executive director of Mental Health Lou, which is a community mental wellness hub. We do workshops like these with our community. We do a lot of library presentations talking about sort of the basics of mental health education, and ways people can support themselves. And then we also help connect people to providers because we know it's really difficult to find a therapist anywhere in the state of Kentucky, really. Even though there are plenty, it's just everybody is very busy. It's hard to find the right fit, et cetera. So we do a little bit of like a concierge work, helping people connect with the right person. If you're interested in contacting me after this, I'll have my email at the end as well, but here it is on the front end. And we have resources, et cetera, on our website. So what I want to start today with is thinking about, we talk about balance a lot. You'll see it, it's very much a buzzword, this idea of balance in our lives. And when I picture balance, I almost picture like these, this image of these rocks, kind of trying to balance, keep things up in the air, right? And I want to talk today about balance from a perspective that is something you can take into your personal and in your professional lives. And it's this idea that balance is more about flexibility. It's shifting as we grow. So to truly understand balance, we need to be able to reflect on who we are, what we need, and what matters most to us. And today we'll be doing a lot of focusing on what matters most to us to help us rebalance. As we're coming to this end of the year, you might notice that things are starting to feel like they've piled up, or there's things you haven't done this year, or perhaps you've just kind of like some habits have slipped, or ways of being, you're just not quite pleased with the way things have maybe turned out, or you're just ready to kind of like hit the reset button and reboot for the new year. And we're going to do that today from a perspective really focusing on values and what matters most. But before we do that, I want you to envision a tree, right? And I want you to think, so I have this picture of these rocks here balancing, smaller stones. And notice it's precarious, it's rigid. It almost seems like maybe, like you'd have to glue everything to keep it all together, to keep that balance, right? So instead, I want you to imagine what true balance is and this idea of flexibility. So I want you to picture a tree. And notice how the trees are growing in different ways. Most are growing up, but at the same time, they're growing out. The branches are reaching for the sunlight. They're getting their needs met. Some are able to weather storms because they have a strong trunk, because they're getting the sunlight they need, the water they need, the nutrients they need, right? Trees are built for flexibility. They can bend, they can flex, they can grow in ways, if the sun is over here, they're going to grow that way. They can do all these things while remaining rooted, right? And they need the sunlight, they need water, they need all the bugs and the birds and everything that's part of their ecosystem. And these things all are happening naturally for a tree. And today I'm going to ask you to think about becoming a little bit more like a tree when it comes to this idea of flexibility and balance, where we're finding our roots and we are stabilizing into our trunks, our core, and we're able to bend and flex with the storms that come our way, right? And as I mentioned, so today we're going to identify values. We're going to explore how those values show up in your lives, how they impact the goals that you've created in the last year and in the year to come, how they've impacted our intentions and our behaviors. And then we're going to reflect on what worked and what didn't work, right? And after that, we're going to learn to be flexible. We're going to learn to adjust. Okay. So to begin, I want you, if you have a piece of paper, this would be great to do. You can also add some into the chat, because it's always great when people are able to interact on these, calls where it's just a bunch of talking heads. But identifying what are your values. So when I'm talking about values, I'm thinking about how we work, what matters to us, what maybe we aspire to become, right? These are our internal guides. If you have a few values that come to mind right now, take a moment and jot them down. If you're not certain of what those values might be, then maybe think about this. Can you reflect on a time when you felt really good, when you felt maybe happy in life, you felt like you were in the flow of things, when you felt engaged? And as you do that, notice what values were showing up for me. What values was what values was I living into? And then notice, another way of thinking about it would be, when you think of a person that you really admire, what values do they hold that you admire? So perhaps it's a person who has great confidence, but not like hubris, but like confidence. They're strong, they're stable, they're steady, right? Maybe it's a person who's really good at letting go of the things that normally would stress out everybody else. Or somebody who's really good at kind of rolling with things. These are a little bit characteristics, but there's a value for them that's leading and guiding them, right? Maybe it's important to them to show up for people. And then finally, if you really, if you find yourself stuck, then just take a little note to think about this in the future, which is asking someone in your life, a family member, a friend, a coworker, what do they admire about you? I don't know if you all can hear my dog barking, and I apologize if you can. This is the joy of a snow day at home. So we can use other people, though, to kind of help us reflect on maybe what are the values that really matter most to us, because sometimes we can't always see them. Somebody else might say, well, you seem to really value hard work. And you might think, oh, it didn't really occur to me to put it that way. So thank you for sharing, right? So hopefully at this point you have a few values written down, right? And I want you to recognize that our values become our internal guides. They can be influenced by culture, they can be influenced by family expectations, societal norms. They can also be influenced by like our fear or our desire for acceptance. So there's a lot of things that kind of shape the values that maybe are currently most important to us. But it's also really helpful to be able to kind of recognize, well, what are the, say, top 5 values I have right now in my life? So if you haven't already, write those down. I'll give you like a few seconds to finish that. And then I want you to think about, so how have those values shown up in your life in the last year, right? How have they influenced the way you've been driven, your actions, your behaviors, your intentions, maybe even like the ways you've talked to yourself? because your values also start to tell us, they tell us a story about how we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to show up in this world, right? So if you're thinking about this list of values that hopefully you've written at least one or two, you might notice that you have some values that also might feel a little bit misaligned. Perhaps family is a really important value, time with your family. And at the same time, work ethic is a really important value. And perhaps over the last year, you've noticed they've kind of become not necessarily in conflict with one another, but they've become a little, they've led you to feeling a little misaligned because you felt pulled in one direction or another, right? So sometimes our goals don't always reflect our true values. Goals can sometimes be like something that pulls us in a direction based off of, again, an internal conflict, such as an internal conflict with with two values like work ethic and family. And we get pulled based off of maybe fear, anxiety, worry about the future. So those things kind of start directing us. They get kind of wrapped up in our values and start directing us on a path that seemingly is the right thing. And then as we reflect over the last year, you might start to notice, well, maybe I really got off track. Maybe I let that fear take me in a direction I didn't anticipate, or maybe I let that that self-talk that was a little more critical take me in a direction that started to make my values feel a little misaligned because I focused more on who I needed to be at work, say, versus who I want to be at home. Go to the next slide here. So as I talk about this, what I want to bring up this idea of types of motivation. If you're familiar with the ideas of there's avoidance motivation and there's approach motivation, right? And so our avoidance motivation is pretty obvious, right? It's like what we are, ways in which we disengage from something, or ways we might like move away from or avoid a negative outcome, a negative consequence. So think of it this way. Avoidance doesn't necessarily mean shutting down. It doesn't mean not doing something. What it can actually mean is like, I'm avoiding one specific thing, so I'm going to behave in all these ways around that, right? So in the example of, say, work ethic, if you have this value of work ethic and you have this idea of who you're supposed to be, and maybe you have a goal of getting, a raise or something at work that, accolades, you might find that you have a fear of failure there. And so you will do everything to avoid failure by starting to behave in ways that are like, maybe you're working a lot, maybe you have poor work boundaries, maybe you've noticed that you say yes to everything, right? Maybe you're finding at the end of that, whether you got the accolades or the raise or whatever, you're still feeling kind of tired and burnt out. Doesn't feel very satisfying. And a lot of that is because when you're trying to avoid a central thing, when we're trying to avoid the fear of failure, for example, the outcome, even if you get the raise, doesn't necessarily feel good in the long run. A lot of people tend to report that they have, more negative feelings afterwards. Approach motivation is when we are able to go towards that thing. So it would be like, perhaps work ethic matters to you. Perhaps there is a goal of, getting a raise, for example. And you want to work towards that, and you recognize the fear. There is a fear that I might fail. There is a fear that someone might say no. There is a fear that maybe I'm just not going to succeed at what I want. Maybe I won't reach that goal this year. And at the same time, when you are approaching it You notice this is like a little bit of an attitude change. When you're approaching it, you're going to feel a little bit different about it, because you're going to say, I acknowledge that fear and I'm going to work through it, and I'm going to move forward with it. And so you're accepting, maybe with along that way, there might be failures, there might be mistakes, there might be things that happen. So, in avoidance brain, you might be thinking, I have to be perfect at this in order to succeed. But in approach motivation, you are acknowledging and recognizing that, like, you're a human. And so you're a little bit kinder to yourself. You're a little bit more gentle to yourself. So that's an example of approach and avoidance motivation. You could have avoidance motivation where it really is you're putting off things, you're avoiding talking to someone, you're avoiding tasks, etc. But again, like, recognize when we can recognize that, we can then decrease some of those feelings that keep us stuck. So the feelings that don't move us along, like feelings of anxiety, feelings of shame, feelings of exhaustion. When we come at something with approach motivation, we are focused on moving forward towards what we want, not away from a fear. And it comes with being more values aligned, kinder, and often it's more sustainable. So again, the first example of avoidance can lead to burnout if somebody is just working towards something like, I cannot fail at this, so I have to just work almost 24 hours a day. I have to send emails at 2 a.m. That's not necessarily, it might get you to your goal, but it's not necessarily going to be sustainable. This is usually the one I have the most questions on. So if you have questions, you can always put those in the chat. I don't know if I can, you all are reduced on my screen, so I might have to pull that up a little bit here. Hold on a second. Make you a little bigger. Okay. I just saw that someone's dog is barking at my dog. I think that's great. They can have their own conversation here on our snow day. All right, so moving right along. I know what I just shared, like, that's a lot of information, but I want you to think, okay, so where have my goals or where have my values maybe been misaligned in the last year, or where have things kind of come into conflict? Again, a really, really common one is family and work, or self-care and work. People will sacrifice self-care because they get into this mindset that is fear-driven, that is avoidance motivation, that says, if I don't work all the time, I am not going to be successful. And at the same time, notice how that is a trap. Notice how that actually makes us stuck. Because in the end, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to be the person who works all the time. You're decreasing all of these possible, like, opportunities for resources in your life, right? Go back to that tree image. It's as if you are taking away your sunlight and you're taking away your water, but you're thinking, it'll be fine. I can survive, right? That's not how we operate as humans. It's not how trees can survive. We need to have downtime. We need to take care of ourselves. And when we get into that avoidance motivation mindset, we tell ourselves a story. We tell ourselves, this is not necessarily as important, so it's okay. I need to focus on work. If I avoid all these other things I need to do for myself, like drink water, sleep, exercise, engage with friends, have, a rich life outside of my workspace, those things are taking away from my goal of succeeding at work. That mindset is very much like a tunnel vision mindset. It prevents us from actually recharging our battery, from being creative, from being able to solve some of those problems. And it also, again, is avoiding something bigger, something that can be more fear-based or anxiety-based, and it doesn't last. It will not be sustainable, right? I have to push or I won't succeed. If I'm not hard on myself, I'll get lazy. Like, notice how I'm worried about being lazy, so I have to be hard on myself. But that's not the only way of being. So I want you to think about, if you've had a goal in the last year, or if you've had if we're acknowledging it from the values perspective, if you have a value that you've listed for today, notice how that value has shown up in your life in the last year. Notice if you feel like you're really aligned with it. And then notice if there are other values that maybe you have on the side here that have either brought some misalignment, or perhaps maybe one has just been put at the top, such as work ethic is right at the top. And you've just put that at the top and the others kind of have fallen. Because what we want to do is we want to enrich your lives. And so I would love for you to be able to have more balance within those, I'm thinking of it like a wheel, which is why I keep doing this, of those values that you have, so that each is getting a little bit of water, each is getting a little bit of sunlight, and you can help yourself feel a little bit more aligned. Okay. So I want you to reflect on the question, where have my goals been in conflict over the last year? And I can give you an example from my own life, which is, as executive director of a small nonprofit, it's really important for me to be out and about in the community, attending events, getting to know people, building up my network, all that. And I do really love peopling. I think it's great, but I also have a certain social battery that does, definitely runs out. And also it is really important to me to have time for myself and time with my family, and time where I am mentally stimulated outside of thinking about mental health and thinking about work and thinking about all that stuff, like just engaging in the world in a different way. And last year, I recognized that I really was putting that like networking right at the top, and that I was really just burning me out. I was tired. I didn't feel like the networking process was really getting me a lot. And that's probably because when I was showing up, I wasn't really showing up. I was just showing up to kind of shake the hands and do the thing and chat people up and be done. So I wasn't really building good relationships in that process. And I recognized this, and I recognized how all these other values felt a little out of alignment. And so I just set an intention for this year where I'm going to outsource some of that. I'm going to let some of my board and my team, my colleagues go and do some of this networking. I'm going to say no to certain things, and I'm going to say yes to more of those values that sort of slipped off my radar. And it definitely made an improvement. It's something that over the year I've had to be very mindful of. I've had to remind myself, hey, like, you've already said yes to 3 engagements this month. That's probably enough. But it helped. So there's always a reset button, just to keep that in mind. But it was really helpful. It was really helpful for me, because then I was able to stimulate my brain in ways outside of work. I noticed like I wasn't feeling as tired, or, heading on that path to burnout, right? I was able to spend more time with my family, and that's something that's really important to me, and I really enjoy it. And I also got more like alone time for myself. And I was not feeling that frustration or resentment anymore of, oh, I have to do all these things. I have to go to these events. And sometimes I'm just really tired, right? And I recognize that some of that was avoidance motivation. I was avoiding this worry of growing a small nonprofit, of what would happen if you don't network, if you don't, get other resources or meet people, all that fun stuff. And while it's true, it's important to do that. I wasn't, I was kind of like putting a band-aid on it because, like I said, then I was going and meeting people, but not really getting much out of it. So I was avoiding, failure of not making connections for my nonprofit. And at the same time, I'm not really making anything happen. I'm just kind of going through the motions. When I stepped back in this last year, as I've been more intentional about it, I've made great connections and I've been able to really be intentional about meeting people and showing up more as fully present because I'm balancing all those other important values in my life as well. And I'm coming at it from an approach motivation standpoint. Okay, so hopefully that story bought you time to fill in that question. All right, so next we're going to look at how do we learn to adjust, right? And so readjusting is something that obviously we have to do a lot. It's not something that's just, done overnight. It's not something that is necessarily easy peasy. But if you have been writing things down, then you probably will notice your motivation style. What goals have you had, or like, are your goals honoring your values? You might notice your behaviors based off of that motivation style. Are your behaviors nourishing or are they draining, right? So we're going to reflect on that a little bit, because as you start to move more towards alignment, you need to be able to have some awareness of this, right? So let me skip to the next slide here. Okay, so as we readjust, I want you to think about one belief or value that you've noticed maybe has been out of alignment in the last year. When we start with one, you might have 10 or 20 that you've noticed, depending on how your year has gone. But this is the practice, right? So what's one belief or value that's become misaligned? And then again, in what ways did that help or hinder you? And so this is sort of my sneaky way of asking about your motivation style. Was it helping you to avoid something uncomfortable, right? Or maybe it hindered you in the sense of, you're starting to recognize now, oh gosh, I really kind of put myself in a corner there with that one. Now, your motivation style could also be approach motivation, but typically when we're looking at this like readjustment place, we're probably starting to notice things that are a little bit more of that avoidance motivation. So what's one belief or value that's become misaligned? And in what ways did it help or hinder you? And then based off of this, as you look at that or notice it, what would be 2 intentions for 2026 that would help you feel more aligned? And if you're feeling a little stuck here, you might think about, if you didn't have the goal or the belief, the action, say, like, if I, in my example of the person who's like, well, I have this goal of getting a raise, so I have to, I'm going to take this value of work ethic and I'm going to like crank it up. Okay. If you didn't have that goal that year, if you didn't have it, how would you feel? Now, sometimes people might respond with, well, I'd feel lazy, or I'd feel directionless. I'd feel, worthless. But I want you to just imagine you didn't have that stressor on you. How would you feel? And this is where a lot more people will say then, well, I'd feel less pressure. I'd feel calmer, right? So sometimes it can be helpful as we're thinking about our intentions and we're noticing, okay, we're recognizing our pattern maybe over the year. A lot of times our intentions are always good intentions, like our New Year's resolutions are always good New Year's resolutions. I want to be better. I want to do this. But we want you to think about, okay, so if you feel kind of stuck, we want to make it meaningful. Then you can ask yourself a question like I just asked, which would be like, well, if you didn't have that thing that hindered you last year, how would you feel? And that kind of gives us a little bit more, like it helps us go back into our bodies a little more and connect maybe with a value or a goal that we didn't notice we had right away. Or even a truth sometimes. Like, wow, yeah, I have been putting a lot of pressure on myself, or I really did let myself get out of hand with this like work ethic value I had. It really ballooned into something that became more of a stressor for me. It became a bigger problem in my life, right? I became very self-critical. I would be less self-critical if I didn't have that goal. Now, that's a thought experiment. So you can still have the goal of making more money. You can still have the value of work ethic. But what it's showing you is the way that that has impacted you in the last year, or maybe the last 15 years, depending on how far back you're looking. So it's helping us just as we're reflecting on this process to kind of better understand the ways in which we've gotten ourselves stuck or out of balance, however you want to say it. And a lot of times it's difficult because we are living our lives, we're in our bodies, we're in our minds every day, and all that stuff is just so normal to us. It's like breathing, right? It doesn't occur to us till we start to slowly step back and like reflect and see the ways in which our actions, our behaviors, our thoughts are showing up in our lives and really truly impacting us, right? And sometimes we even need that like extra person, like that third party, to also kind of step in and say like, well, I'm noticing this is really important to you, or I'm noticing this seems to be a stressor. I'm noticing you're the only person on our team who sends emails at 2 a.m. Right? So we're not always able to kind of find it right away, but I'm wanted to share like and throw out a little bit extra here for you. All right. So what might be your 2 intentions that you would set for yourself that would help you align more fully with your core values and the person you want to become or the person you're becoming? And that person you're becoming might be the person that felt like, oh, I would feel so much less pressure on myself. I'd feel so much less critical. Maybe that's the person you're becoming, right? We want to move into that approach motivation style of a person. You can still get things done and be nice to yourself. I promise you. All right. So hopefully you have an idea now, a little bit here. We can talk about this at the end. I hope you stick around to chat because we're kind of heading towards the end here right now. But so the last piece of all of this, kind of wrapping this up, is this idea of when do we get started? And so many people love a good New Year's resolution. I mean, some people have given up on them at this point, but so many people love a good New Year's resolution. And a lot of times we pick our New Year's resolution to start the 1st of January, right? Beginning the 1st of January, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be this way. And that, how many New Year's resolutions have, panned out? A lot of times, not so good, right? So what I'd rather encourage you to think is 2 things here. One is I want you to pick a date to begin that is meaningful to you. So while January 1st can feel like a fresh start and that can feel, meaningful, Sometimes we pick an anniversary of something. We pick a birth date, you know. Uh, pick something that has more meaning to you, because you're actually more likely to do it then. You're already pairing more meaning to it by making it, well, beginning on my mom's birthday, I'm going to start being, more focused on those values that kind of trickle to the bottom over the year. Why your mom's birthday and not your birthday? Maybe your mom's birthday is meaningful to you. Maybe your relationship with your mom has a dynamic, and that dynamic encourages you to take care of you. It could be your birthday if that's what you prefer. It could be any day. It's just picking a date that matters and is meaningful to you. And for most people, January 1st is not necessarily a meaningful day to them. It's a big day, but it's not a meaningful day. And so people are much more successful if they pick something that has more symbolism for them, if there's more meaning to it. And also, it gives them, a lot of times, this gives people a little more leeway too, as far as like, how do we put this in practice? So the next piece of that would be what I tell my clients a lot of times is, if you have your New Year's resolution, that's totally fine. What I'd love for you to do next is keep this in mind. The next few months are all about seeds, planting seeds, right? Because so often, if, for example, you want to, your New Year's resolution is like something goal oriented, like I want to achieve this goal, I want to do this thing, I want to build something. You're not going to build that thing on January 1st. You're going to build up to it. And sometimes that requires learning. Sometimes, in this case, it's going to require reflection, or maybe some planning, maybe adjustments in your life. It might require practice, right? So you're going to use maybe some of this build-up time before your symbolic day as practice time, so that you can get into the groove of it before you really hit go and hit reset. So I want you to think about, what will your practice look like? What will this look like in practice, right? What will it look like to kind of make some of these adjustments? Because you can't just do it overnight. Like I said, like I couldn't just say, well, I RSVP'd to go to these things, and I told my board I would go to these networking events, and I talked to these people, but yeah, I'm just not going to do that because it's not aligned with my values. So I'm just done, and I'm just going to do, that could have been my approach, but at the same time, that I would have had some other feelings to deal with at that point. I probably wouldn't have felt so great, disappointing my board. There'd be some other conflicts. So instead, I just started making adjustments over time, right? And I talked to my board, and I got support from my board of, how about you all go to some of these events, and et cetera, right? I use my resources. So think about how you're going to put it into practice. And then also, how do you return to your values when you start to notice drift? So for some people, this can be a simple, like, visual reminder of what's important, so some people have like a sticky note on their desk. Some people like to journal, and that brings them back every day or every week or whenever they journal. Some people just have a little reminder or a note on their phone that pops up, and it's like, are you doing this thing? Other people have accountability friends or family or colleagues that they're maybe making changes together, and they can then talk about it and make sure that they're both staying on track. All right. So what will this look like in practice? And what's your plan for drift? And then at the end here, and I can share this, but you all can easily Google this as well. As you want to continue maybe like looking at values exploration, because I know it's not so simple to say, what are your values? What are the most important 5 values to you at this point in your life? Like that's a tricky one. And sometimes I know when I've done these values workshops with people, we spend a lot of what we do is just spend our time listing values because there are so many types of values and that you can have, right? And some of them are so close to each other, it can be hard to say which one is exactly maybe the value that you're wanting to pinpoint. So I recommend Brene Brown has a values exercise, and I put it here at the end of my slides, but I can share the link as well. And it's just another little deepening reflection that you can do to help you identify what are the values that are important to you. But then you can also remember, ask your friends and family what they admire about you, which can kind of help you see maybe, oh, they admire that I always show up. I wonder if that's a value of mine. Maybe it's important to me to always show up. You can set that intention of when are you going to start? What's your symbolic date? And then think about how are you going to return to it? What's your way of checking yourself when you drift? Because it's really normal to do that. Life gets in the way, or every now and then we get into that tunnel vision space and we think, I know I have these values, but at the same time, this thing is really important. So I got to push them to the side. If that happens, you're going to have to rebalance again at some point soon. And then, making commitments. So to small behaviors that are going to plant these seeds and help you become more aligned. So you don't have to start, like I said, you don't have to start January 1. You don't necessarily have to even start today. But the goal would be for you to start thinking about your values and then figuring out the path towards a little more of realignment. Okay. So we have time now. If you would like, we can open it up to questions if there are questions. You're also welcome to email me if you would like, and I will get this link for you and share it in the chat.
Okay. Thanks, Amanda. That was awesome.
Thank you. Let me stop my share. That's the next fun thing.
Here we go.
Here is
let me ask you a question. So I've been kind of, over this last year, kind of working on this path, and what do you think about like morning rituals and stuff? Because I've read a lot about that.
Yeah.
And there's a billion different things that people recommend. I mean, what?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I always like finding something that's meaningful to you, obviously, is probably the most important thing there. But I like morning rituals because they can be a good reset, right? It's like a check. How depends on how you want to use them. You could use it as a reset. You could use it as a way of, like intention setting for the day. You could use it as a reflection. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. Do you have a morning ritual?
I have many. Been experimenting, So I did for a long time. I did morning pages, the artist way kind of thing. Now I'm trying to be more intentional about, or more structured, basically. So, thinking through, like writing down a bit about what went well, like some reflection, what went well yesterday and the week, and then what is my biggest thing I need to do today, and sort of how am I feeling. And I often have an issue with avoidance motivation. So I find that if I write things down, then it kind of pulls it out, and I go the other way, and now I'm ready to go. And I think the biggest thing is, and a lot of people use that I've talked to, they have tried this app, Dave. I have to have a pen and a paper and an early morning and a cup of coffee. I mean, that's what it takes for me to get things going.
Yeah, I think the apps can be helpful, but I do think as far as like how our brains work best, if you think about it this way, when you're writing, you are now you're not just reading something somebody else wrote or gave you, right? But you're doing something physical. You're also having to think about what you're going to put on the page, and then you're reading your own work. So it deepens that meaning. It's kind of like why when we talk out loud versus like think through a problem, you're reprocessing what we just said. So we're deepening it a little bit versus just like thinking about what you want to do. But I like your rituals. Mine is a walk, a morning walk. Just
Okay.
even if it's a short one, I just need to do a little lap or something just to get, you know, otherwise I will probably come and sit down and just get started working.
Yeah. I've noticed that like super creative people tend to do that. You know, like I was reading about Stephen King's morning ritual and I don't know, there's a bunch of different
Yeah.
famous authors and artists, and it's, you know, they have breakfast and then they walk for 30 minutes or something like that. And then they're ready to power in, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
Uh,
Um,
I think though that, you know, what I've noticed is like if you can do something in the morning to kind of set your attitude, you know, if you feel good, you're naturally more productive and can do more things
right.
um, than not, you know. So that's kind of, I think, the whole goal of this whole thing of having boundaries and taking care of yourself because you feel better, which makes you a better person in your work life as well.
Right, exactly.
See, Caton says, what are some of the biggest or of the bad habits people have? Wow,
I
that's
know
a,
that could be a long list.
yeah,
Especially because there's like personal life, professional life. What are we talking?
all right.
I'm gonna go a little more general here, which is I think
Good
one of
idea.
the hardest or like bad habits people have, or like one of the biggest bad habits people can have, is the bad habit of not being curious, of like being like that. I mentioned tunnel vision a few times,
Hmm.
where we get ourselves into an idea or like a headspace that like what we're doing is the only way to do it. Um, so you could expand that out. Like I gave the example, of like someone sending emails at like 2 in the morning. That gives me the idea that they have a bad habit of checking work emails outside of work hours. Probably because they are telling themselves a story about how important their job is. And I know that some of our jobs are important, but all of our jobs are important. At the same time, they're not every aspect of our job is going to be so important that you have to miss sleep, right? Um, and so I think sometimes when we just get into that like very myopic space, that's probably one of the worst habits. And that kind of encompasses all the bad habits, maybe.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's where we're telling ourselves, I have to keep doing this thing, even though
right.
we're not in that space of curiosity where we can kind of go, well, how else could I solve this? Or is that really true? Or, yeah, get ourselves stuck.
Yeah. I read William Manchester's biography of Winston Churchill, you know, and I found it striking that he talks about this a lot, but even in the middle of World War II, when things were really going bad for England, Churchill took regular vacations to the beach to recharge, you know? I thought, you know,
Amazing.
that is so interesting because I mean, what couldn't be a better use of your time than to spend all your time trying to save the country? But he knew he had to
Right.
step back and recharge, you know, to be better at what he did.
And that avoidance motivation, if he was afraid of what happens if I leave,
Yeah,
could prevent him from doing that, from taking care of himself to recharge, and
right.
he maybe would stay. And of course we know how good decisions we make when we're fatigued and tired, and you know
Hmm.
especially under circumstances like that are like have bigger consequences.
You know, when you're first starting out too, like especially if you're deep in the avoidance motivation, you know, you mentioned decisions. I mean, you can't make decisions in that mindset.
No.
So, you know, if you're just starting out and that's kind of your thing, you know, living in this avoidance thing, I mean, are there some tips or quick tools that you can use to maybe open the curtains just a little bit, you know, to make it take a few steps forward, you know, to get out of that in the
Yeah.
moment, maybe even?
Yeah, well, the first obviously has to be that you recognize you're there, because like I said, it's so easy to convince ourselves that what we're doing is the thing that has to be done,
Hmm.
right? So that would be that, like, can you question it? Can you check in? Can you ask yourself maybe even just like, is this thought really 100% true?
Right.
And sometimes that in itself just kind of like helps us open that curtain a little bit to go, well, okay, it's not 100% true, you know. And that can then maybe even help us recognize some of like that underlying, you know, I mentioned fear. It's not always fear, but I'll just use it for the example, like that underlying maybe fear or worry that is like activating us to kind of stay in that headspace or, you know, in that avoidance space. And then we can kind of like, okay, I get it. Like that's a little bit more of what's going on. But you can't get there. That's a lot like that's a lot more work until you kind of open that little curtain of just simply like, do I know this is 100% true?
Mhm.
If I don't send this email at 2 a.m., what will happen? Right?
Yeah. You know, you can type that email at 5 and then have it delay send to 2 a.m. so you look like you're really working late.
I know. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. I feel like when I get emails at 2 a.m., I will often, I mean, I'm not reading them at 2 a.m. If I see somebody who sent it at 2 a.m., I'll think, you should have delayed this till 8 a.m.
Yeah,
because now I'm worried about you.
right.
But yeah, I think it's like I said, it becomes just so it's like breathing. We don't think about it. We've convinced ourselves a lot of times that this is the only way of being. Maybe you're in a work environment or work culture that's that way too. You know, I mean, how often have people maybe said, I need this, you know, I need this thing. I need it by next week. It's really, really important. And then
Mhm.
so you put everything aside, you get it done, you send it to them. And then what happens next? Um, Sometimes they're like, great, thank you so much. That's due in 2 weeks.
Mm.
And you're like, well, that's not very helpful.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Um, Kind of coming up on the top of the hour here, but do you think you could maybe just like list like some starting steps and like if you were going to tell us as a group, here's what I want you to try first, like, you know, try this and then here's your next step. You know, what would be the first 5 steps that you would recommend everybody kind of diving into to get started?
diving into the first one would be the link I put in the chat.
Hmm.
Because that takes you back to that place of just like starting with the exploration, figuring out what are your values. And then you can kind of run through some of the steps that I went through today, which are really like, then you start to, so you do that hard work of identifying the values, which is really the hardest part, narrowing it down into maybe like, what are my top 5 right now in my life? Because they'll change throughout your life. And then, looking at that, like, what's my experience been? How have these impacted me over the last year? Right. What's been maybe my like driving value? And then I'm not doing a good job of listing these out for you. But continuing through that process of then noticing that misalignment and setting that intention. Well, what are the values that I want to have moving into the next year? Right.
Hmm.
And that last piece is probably the most extensive piece, which is how do you plant those seeds? What's that going to look like for you? And what supports you need to do that? And a lot of times people will just, like I said, people just like, okay, I'm just going to do this. It's going to happen. But they haven't done anything to take care of maybe the avoidance motivation stuff on the back end. So you have
Right.
to plan for that. You have to figure out what you're going to do to take care of that before you can actually move forward.
Yeah.
That was a little bit of a sloppy 5, but there you go.
But it was good.
Yeah.
Man, this has been fantastic. I really, really enjoyed seeing all this stuff and it's something I'm really interested in. So I'm glad you came on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If anybody wants, reach out to Amanda. We'll send a recording tomorrow or next day maybe with all this, so you can check that out and with Amanda's contact info. So tell you what, this is really important stuff, and I think that doing nothing is not the right thing to do. I mean, try something, do one thing, and move forward that way. So
Exactly.
yeah.
And stay warm today.
Mhm. And then, as always, if we can help you in your business, the Small Business Development Center is always here. Reach out to us at KentuckySBDC.com/Louisville, and we're here to help. So is Amanda.
Thank you all for having me.
Yeah. So, Jen, thanks for driving the ship as always.
Sure, please stick around for the survey.
Yeah. Have a great Tuesday, everybody, and we will see you next week.